Welcome back to our parenting class. We are beginning the fourth and final video of the series, and we've sort of reached the end of some of the really practical and helpful things that Andy Stanley has to offer in this parenting class, and I'm looking forward to this clip. Good morning, Erin.
Good morning.
And I'm looking forward to today. I think this video has a lot to offer, and should be nice. We had a kind of an extended break after Easter, and so we have 3 weeks of this video, a break for May 9th confirmation / Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to everybody. And then we'll come back on May 16th, we'll have a special speaker coming to talk about general childhood safety, car seat safety, and I'll share more information about that later. But to jump into the video, the clip we're going to watch today is right under 15 minutes. That's a little bit longer than usual, but he has some good things to say, and he tells some stories, which I always think is kind of a helpful illustration. So give me a second to optimize the sound for this. And here we go. We're going to watch 15 minutes of video 4 of the parenting class.
One of the inevitable challenges of parenting is that we love our stuff, right? And we love our kids. And from time to time, there's conflict between our love for our stuff and our love for our kids, or maybe that's just me, I don't know. When our kids were 7, 5, and 3, all 20 months apart, I bought a used high mileage Infiniti. And it was the nicest car I'd ever owned. It was super dark green. In fact, it looked black at night. It was in pretty much mint condition, and I intended to keep it that way, which was probably my first mistake. And unfortunately, I was alone in that pursuit. So one Saturday morning, I'm taking out the trash in the garage, and I noticed there was something on the hood of my immaculate Infiniti. I walked over for a closer look, and to my utter dismay, discovered that someone had scratched a large capital letter A into the hood of my car. And beside the A were attempts at several other lowercase letters. So, needless to say, I was not happy, and within minutes, my 2 sons were standing on each side of me as I demanded to know who scratched up my car, who messed up my stuff. Silence. And then Garrett, our 5-year-old, piped up. He said this. He said, "Daddy, Allie did it. Allie did it with a rock." Allie did it with a rock. Allie, who was a whopping 3 years old. So I called Allie out to the garage. I pointed to my hood and I said, "Allie, did you do this?" And she smiles at me and she says, "Yes, sir, Daddy. I practiced my letters," her letters. And yes, she had. She had been practicing her letters on the hood of my car with a rock. So what do you do, right? I mean, last time we were together, I told you that we disciplined our children for the 3 Ds: dishonesty, disobedience, disrespect. I'd never told my kids specifically, don't practice your letters on the hood of Daddy's car with a wok. So it wasn't really disobedience. She admitted it with a smile, so she wasn't being dishonest. And she certainly didn't mean any disrespect. And then, there's no way for me to explain to a 3-year-old the significance of what she'd done and what it was going to cost me in terms of dollars and time and hassle. Daddy's going to have to take the car to the shop. What's a shop? I'm going to have to rent a car. What's rent a car? Then I'm going to have to pay for the repair. She has no context for any of that. And of course, it would have been absurd for me to require her to pay for the damage. So what do you do in a situation like that? I did the only thing I could do. I said, "Allie," I knelt down and kind of got eye to eye. I said, "Allie, please don't do that anymore." She said, "Yes, sir, Daddy." Then she hugged me, went back inside, and she never practiced her letters with a wok on the hood of my car again. Hey, today we're wrapping up our series, Parenting in the 21st Century. Parenting in the 21st Century. If you're a parent, if you're about to be a parent, if you hope to be a parent, maybe you're helping another parent, or maybe you're watching your own kids parent, this series is for you. It's actually for really anybody who feels the weight and responsibility of equipping an infant, a child, a teenager, or even a high school student for life. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, or you missed any of the previous episodes in this series, this entire series is actually available on the site or app you are currently using. Now, as I pointed out in the first episode of this series, when it comes to good examples of family and parenting, the Bible is not all that helpful. In fact, the Bible is not even all that encouraging. By modern standards, it's pretty much an encyclopedia of family dysfunction. But, and this is the good news, Jesus and the authors of the New Testament provide us with basically a North Star to guide and inform our parenting. And while Jesus never talked about parenting directly, he laid the foundation for New Testament parenting when he laid the foundation for New Testament behavior. And he laid the foundation for New Testament behavior when he issued his new covenant command. He called it his new command. He said, "A new command I give you." And specifically, the new command was for us to love others the way that he, Jesus, loved us. And the way forward, I believe, and this is what we've been talking about, the way forward for us as parents is actually embedded in this one big, all-encompassing command. And I say embedded because the implications for parenting aren't all that apparent on the surface. But again, Jesus wasn't talking specifically to parents. Fortunately, as we've said, the Apostle Paul came along and he gave us some handles, some love handles. Essentially, here's what he said. He said, this is what the Jesus brand of love looks like. Here's how the Jesus brand of love behaves. Here's how it behaves under pressure. Here's how it behaves at home. And while Paul scatters his applications throughout his New Testament letters, his most famous explanation, I think his most famous explanation of what the Jesus brand of love looks like and behaves like is also his most instructive for us parents. And it's found in the 13th chapter of his first letter to Christians living in ancient Corinth. We call it 1 Corinthians. Now, in part 2 of this series, we began our journey through Paul's application list. But you'll remember, we only got 3 words in that first time. We got to this: love is patient. And we got kind of stuck there because parenting often falls apart there. Then last time we were together, we made it through 3 more of his applications. Love is kind. And we said that kindness is loaning someone your strength rather than reminding them of their weakness. It's loaning your children your strength rather than constantly reminding them of their weakness. And then he says this: love does not envy, it does not boast, and it is not proud. And then, if you'll remember, we spent a good bit of time on this next one. Love does not dishonor others. And we said that honor and mutual respect are actually at the heart of every mutually satisfying relationship in the home and outside the home. So honor, we said, is a better goal for parenting than obedience. Obedience basically answers the question, how low can I go? Honor points us in an entirely different direction. So picking up where we left off last time, the Apostle Paul follows the honor discussion with a similar idea when he writes this. So here we go. He writes, love is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Love is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Love isn't selfish. Love puts the interest and the needs of other people first, which would pretty much solve all relationship problems, I think. And then the most significant thing about these 2 phrases is the Apostle Paul connects 2 important dots for us by addressing what is perhaps the most common expression of self-seeking within the context of relationships, and certainly within the context of parenting. Love is not easily angered. Love is not easily angered. Now, this is so interesting. The Greek term translated angered here is actually a cooking term. In other literature, it's translated as stir or stirred up. So here's what he's saying, that love is not easily stirred up. Do your kids ever get you stirred up? Of course they do. This is such a great term because when you're cooking and you're stirring a pot, what happens? Now, I'll be honest, I don't cook, but I do stir the natural peanut butter that Sandra buys, which I love, but you have to work for it, right? I mean, the peanuts have all settled to the bottom of the jar. The peanut butter is on top of the peanuts, and then there's about an inch of oil on top of all of that. So when you open it up, you have to stir it all together for what feels like about 30 minutes, right? But I know I'm finished when the peanuts that started at the bottom of the jar are finally showing up on the top. Anybody else hungry? Anyway, the point is simply this. When we stir a pot, or when we stir the natural peanut butter, we aren't creating or adding anything new to the mix. What are we doing? We're just surfacing what was already there to begin with. And I know you don't want to hear this, but speaking from personal experience, our children Our kids don't actually make us angry. Our kids simply stir up or bring to the surface what's already in us. And they do it better than anybody else. In fact, it's in those moments that we finally understand our own parents, right? And what is it that's already in us that they're so good at bringing to the surface? Well, Paul already told us. It is our self-seekingness. It is our selfishness, our desire to have our own way, our desire for them to obey and then to go outside and play. Now, the truth is, no one has ever made any of us angry. They just stirred us up. Now, having your emotions stirred is inevitable, and chances are, in each stage of parenting, you're going to have to figure out the new best way to regain perspective and recharge your emotional batteries. Parenting is emotional. It's emotional for two reasons. It's emotional because we care, and it's emotional because we're selfish. And while I'm on this, it's important for you to talk to your kids about the emotional side of life, right? Don't hide it. Don't pretend. Being emotional isn't weakness. It's humanness. As one child psychologist put it, I love this quote. He writes, it is scarier. This is so important. It is scarier for a child to have a parent who is struggling and doesn't talk about it, a parent who's going through something that's emotional and doesn't discuss it with the child, versus a parent who is struggling and does talk about it. So age-appropriate conversations about the emotional side of life, it's so healthy for our children. It's really healthy for everybody. And our kids learn that it's okay to feel and it's okay to express those feelings. After all, like us, somebody's going to come along and stir their pot. Probably you. And when that happens, they need to understand what's going on and they need to understand what to do. And if you haven't figured it out, it's going to be difficult to help them figure it out. So this is such a big deal. I want to press into this just a bit more, and I want to invite another author into the discussion. So before we continue with what the Apostle Paul had to say, I need to remind you of something James, the brother of Jesus, had to say. And I say remind because we've discussed this passage on many occasions, but it is worth repeating because honestly, I think it's one of the most important, practical, relational insights you'll ever hear. It explains why we are so easily stirred up by the people we love the most. And maybe most importantly for our discussion, it provides us, I think, with a handle for helping our kids understand why they get stirred up as well. And the way that James approaches this, he asks a question and then he answers it for us. And here's the question. He says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? In other words, what is the source of all the conflict you're having in your home or wherever you're having conflict? And of course, when you read or hear a question like this, we're all immediately tempted to point to someone else's behavior, somebody else's words, or maybe the tone of their words. And James and the Apostle Paul say, no, that behavior, those words, even the tone, simply stirred up what is already in you. And then James answers the question. He says, isn't it true that these fights and these quarrels come from your desires that battle within you? He continues. He says, you want something, you desire, but you can't get it. You don't have it. You covet it, but you cannot get what you want. So what do? You quarrel and you fight. This is so powerful. The source of our anger, the source of our arguments, the source of our conflict, the source of our quarrels is we're not getting something that we want. Now, parents, I'm not pointing my finger. I'm speaking from personal experience. This is so true, but it is so difficult to see, especially when it involves our children. I know from my own experience, when I would step back long enough from tension in our home to remind myself of this simple but very powerful principle, I was, and actually I continue to be, a much better parent. And my internal conversation would go something like this. Andy, be honest. Part of the problem is, Andy, you're not getting what you want. You want them to do their best and they're not doing their best. You want them to pay attention and they're not paying attention. You want them to quit picking on each other and they keep picking on each other. But Andy, part of the reason you're so stirred up, the reason you're about to say things you'll have to apologize for later is you're not getting what you want. So admit it. own it. And you know what? When I did, when I own my slice of the conflict pie, the temperature comes down. James was right. Fights and quarrels erupt when somebody isn't getting what they want, when somebody isn't getting what they deserve, when somebody isn't getting what they need. So parents, husbands, wives, own your slice of the conflict pie, and that's your slice. It's why I have suggested to you before that you should get in the habit, when it's appropriate, of stopping mid-conversation or mid-argument and saying this: hey, do you know what part of the problem is? Do you know what part of the problem is right here? Part of the problem is I'm not getting what I want. Hey, let's just stop this for a minute. Do you know what part of the problem is? I'm not getting what I want. Honestly, I'm not sure there is a more valuable relationship principle to teach and model for our kids than this one. I can't think of anything more important for them to understand. And there's probably nothing more important for us to model to help them understand the reason behind every single conflict they're going to encounter. Because behind every single conflict they're going to encounter is a someone, or perhaps two someones, who aren't getting their way.
Okay, so we're gonna stop there for now, which is sort of a cutoff in the middle of a point he's making, but he has plenty to say, and I know there's lots to talk about and lots to unpack and maybe even push back from, depending on sort of how you heard that in there. So I have a couple of things that I think were interesting in there, but I'd love to sort of open the floor to y'all first. Was there a piece in there that stuck out to you, or something in there that kind of sounded like things that you've also learned and experienced in your parenting journey?
The thing that stood out to me, which I thought was pretty powerful, was his peanut butter analogy. What a great, that it stirs up what's underneath. And I thought the analogy was fantastic, and it really kind of makes you see the truth in that. And I didn't know that the Greek base for anger was stirred up, but I mean, those are certainly appropriate. And I just loved that whole conversation about how, when we're angry, it's really just something inside of us getting, stirred up, or that we're not getting what we want, which I think is pretty powerful. Never really considered that.
I think sometimes, I mean, again, I'm thinking more personal adult relationships than little kids right now, but there's a strong desire to be left alone and to not be pushed and challenged and irritated and bugged. And just like when he said one time, we just want the children to obey and then run outside and play. And if somebody's kind of disturbing our peace and harmony on a repeated kind of nagging basis, that irritation, that we think is not true anger, but it's more irritation, can cause a lot of friction and conflict that's just not that deep seated, that can cause a lot of tension and that kind of thing.
The thing that stood out to me the most was about the kids being more stressed if you don't talk to them about what you're going through. And I do know that you need to tailor it to, the age. I mean, you can't tell them, if something's really bad financially, you can't say we're going to be on the side of the road next week, kids, and things like that. But I found with my children, they know when something's wrong. And I know growing up, my parents were of the generation that you don't talk to your kids really about anything that grown-ups do. But like, I knew when things were going on, and it just made me, if you don't know the facts about what's going on in your mind, you create all these scenarios, which creates more stress. So I really think that talking to your kids, it brings the family closer together. And it's like, look, this is something we're all going through because we're a family. We're going to be okay. But this is why mom and dad you know, if you see mom cry or you've seen dad seem stressed, because they deserve to know, you know, I feel like that's so important. And we do that with our girls. And I need to be reminded to do that with Powers. He's 13, you know, and if he can watch us move through and resolve conflict, then that's how he's going to learn to do it in his life. And if we hide it from him, he'll never learn.
I totally agree with that. I think it's so important to give not only kids but adults words for their emotions and then model that for them. I've seen in counseling situations with couples or, you know, with children, you know, and they're like, the child just has meltdowns, you know, he just freaks out. He can't control his anger. Many times it's because it's not been modeled for them or they've not been given appropriate words to identify their feelings. So I don't know. I love what Andy Stanley says in all of this. This is very spot on, and it's not just for children, but it's in, you know, marital relationships. That whole idea of you're not getting what you want, that is so powerful. I mean, my sister went with us to the wedding last night, and she's younger than I am, but let me just say, she is the boss. And, you know, I've let her be the boss. I think she's always resented that she wasn't the firstborn. And she says, you make friends easier. People remember you. She is extremely successful. I mean, she's on the board at a college and vice president of a hospital. And trust me, I mean, she is type A, and I'm very proud of her. But she thinks, but you just smile and people remember you and they know you. And I'm like, oh, you know. And here she gets in the car with us. And she's like, I feel it getting stirred up, you know, the peanuts in the bottom of the jar. And I'm like, you know, I'm going to really be calm. And she's late meeting us to ride with us. And I'm like, be calm, be calm. You know, and I kept thinking about Andy Stanley. What is she stirring up in me? And I think it's that competitiveness, which I just don't understand. It's not my nature. But anyway, there's good stuff in this.
It's a desire to control and be in charge.
Yes. Which is fine. Most of the time I let her be the boss, but you know, woo. Anyway, thank y'all for letting me vent.
That was funny. I like that a lot. I was thinking back to what Andy said and then what Liz said, and it reminded me of a conversation that I had with my husband recently. And this relates to the, you know, showing conflict and showing ways to work through conflict. And we were talking about our child and the way that we feel like this pressure to not show things that are going on. Like we feel like our child thinks that things should always be just right, or there shouldn't be problems, there shouldn't be conflict. And my grandmother was very much like that. And I sort of just recently made that connection. Like she wanted everything to be just so all the time, and you know, nobody to be upset, nobody to have any problems or anything like that. And you know, we always joke she lived well into her 90s, and she thought that every day she should wake up and feel great. You know, even in her 70s, 80s, 90s, she just thought that, you know, she should never feel bad. Her, you know, her body should always work just like it was supposed to, and everything would be fine. And if there were a pill that she could take to make her feel that way, she would have taken it. Like she would do anything that a doctor told her to do to make her feel good, and to feel well and be healthy all the time. And you know, I, like I said, I kind of feel like our child is sort of headed in that direction with that same mindset. And so I think this is a really good reminder for us to show healthy resolution of conflict and to show that it's okay for things to come up. We can't control, you know, the world around us and all the things that are happening, but we can control the way that we react to them and the way that we resolve those things. So that's sort of continuing on that frame of mind and that thought process that we're kind of currently going through. So thank you for that. That was helpful.
you know, along those same lines, it's funny because Bryant and I were just having a conversation this morning how, I mean, even to this day, I mean, Bryant and he just turned 50 and I'm knocking on the door, and our parents still don't tell us the absolute truth about what all is going on. His dad is pretty sick right now with Parkinson's and declining rapidly. And my dad passed away in 13. And we were talking this morning about how his mom doesn't always really tell anybody exactly what it is stated, because they live a little bit, they don't live in Greenville, so we don't see them every day. And she sugarcoats everything as though we can't really handle the truth of it all, which is just so fascinating. And it is convicting to me to make sure that we don't do that with our children, because I just think you can handle things so much better. I mean, when my dad died, I remember, I mean, he had a brain tumor, so we knew he was going to die. But when the end got really close, I was like, I had no idea that it was really that close. Because again, my parents didn't live here in Greenville. And so it's fascinating. And maybe it is somewhat generational. I do feel like that, you know, we do a better job of talking to our kids about things than my parents did even now, but I probably do still tend to sugarcoat things a little bit in this, you know, in the name of protection. But it's funny to think that even here I am 50 years old and my parents are still kind of sugarcoating things for me. You know, it's an interesting take on things, but super important, I think, like Liz said and Catherine said, to kind of be out there and honest with it.
That sounds like my in-laws. If it's something that they're uncomfortable with, we don't get the whole truth. And it's like, you know, we're adults, we're old enough, but we either get a partial truth or sometimes none at all. But we've sort of been like, you know, we're adults, we can take it. And so it's gotten better. But still, it's like if they're uncomfortable with it, they're not going to be as straightforward. So we're trying to be better, you know, with our kids, like in an age appropriate way, trying to explain things. But, you know, hopefully we're doing it right. We'll see.
I definitely think it's a generational thing. I can just hear my parents saying, you know, we just don't talk about that. You don't talk about that. That's personal. And I'm like, why? Why wouldn't you talk about it? It's part of life, you know, like menopause. I mean, I know that's a bad example, but, you know, like something that is as common and as natural as, you know, a fight between a married couple. You know, let's just talk about it. And I work in the field of addiction, and I'm telling y'all, if this doesn't scare you, the main thing that I hear, especially boys or young men saying, is in my family, everything had to be just so. We always had to smile for the photos. My parents wanted me to wear a certain outfit, be a certain way, play a sport. And, you know, I just couldn't handle it anymore. And my outlet was drinking or playing with my, you know, cutting up with my friends, because they couldn't live up to that. Everything's great all the time. We don't talk about our problems. We don't, you know, if we're having a problem at school or being whatever it is. So, I mean, it eats away at you if you pretend all the time. And I know my grandmother, talking about grandmoms. Yeah. I mean, her husband was abusive and mentally, and my mom said she just remembered my grandmother just singing away in the kitchen, being yelled at, but just singing away. Everything's great. You know, that was just that mentality. And I think it's so awesome that we're getting this, you know, this Bible study to tell us that we really do need to show our kids everything, the good, bad, and ugly. Otherwise, when they turn 18 and they leave the house, they're going to be shocked that everything isn't just rosy all the time. So that's all.
I really think the largest driver of mental health problems, addictions, the struggles that we see kids, young people, adults go through is the inability to cope with pain. Because our natural instinct as parents is to protect and nurture, and it hurts us. Maybe it's partly our inability to deal with pain that we so struggle with our own children having to deal with pain. And if we better equip them to deal with the pain, and we are open and honest and vulnerable, I think those are some of the greatest tools we can give them. Then they don't turn to drugs or unhealthy, addictions and everything. Anyway, that's my little thing.
The irony of a lot of it is, just like what Greta said, I thought of this, is that we think it's good, it's that we're doing the right thing by shielding somebody from pain or bad news or that kind of thing. So we think that we're kind of doing them a favor when we're really not. And so it's sort of counterintuitive in some way to share that, because I mean, all of y'all talk about some generational thing with your parents or grandparents. I mean, I remember my mother doing the same thing. I mean, and so it's an opportunity, for a next generation to just have more openness about all that. But I did this myself, and, with my own children, and thinking that I was taking the burden on myself, and that, but, it really in some ways is disrespectful to not share the truth with others and think they can't handle it.
What strikes me too, hearing what Liz was saying, is, don't you think social media just exacerbates that so much now too? I mean, you scroll through your news feed and everybody looks like they are just living their best life, right? I mean, they're on the top of some mountain or they're at the lake, and everybody just looks like everything's rosy, because no one's going to put up the picture of, you having a knockdown, drag out fight with your husband. But it's interesting to think how much that's magnified or made worse just by social media today. Because, normally you wouldn't see what everybody's doing, or what everybody wants you to think is going on. Interesting.
I personally think social media is the devil. I mean, the real devil manifested. I mean, he just loves it. He loves social media. It's tearing our country apart, or tearing all of us apart. These kids are it's just awful. You're right. That's all they see is what they're not doing, and what they think they should be doing, and how their body should look, and what their family life should look like, and what their social life should look like. And it's all a lie.
Mm-hmm.
Just awful. Should be outlawed, illegal.
I know this is really fluffy, but there was a podcast series I listened to called Under the Influence. And it was, I don't know, it was probably 5 or 6 episodes, and it talked about influencers, and like a big focus on mom influencers and how it impacts the way we see our kids in our life. And it makes you really understand how fake so much of it is. But yet here we are comparing our reality to what they've been able to stage.
Yeah.
I think what you just mentioned, Erin, too, is like sort of why we have this as a Sunday school class too, like why this is part of Christ Church, is that like no one does anything perfectly ever. And like that's sort of, if the church is just a collection of people, it means we're just a bunch of people doing things wrong, but doing it the best way we can in community. And so I think like what you just touched on is sort of like why this is a series that we've dedicated a whole semester to, is that we can all sort of come together and admit the things that we're doing wrong, the things that we're working on, the ways we've made mistakes in the past, and not have to hide in this you know, this is the place you can come and be like, okay, I've definitely made a mistake, or like, wow, that's great advice. I wish I had known that in this setting, because it would have been great, because that's sort of, that's the why of this class. So
Mhm.
glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
And also with that, we're at time. So thanks for this discussion, y'all. I think this has been helpful, and I hope that the parents who watch this, when we post this later, can benefit from that and can sort of hear y'all talk about the ways that you've learned and grown as parents, and the ways that you're still working and trying and growing as parents, and can sort of come along the journey with you guys. So thank you, as always, for sharing and your honesty and just this conversation, because it's great and helpful, and y'all are a great resource to the other families at our church. We will be meeting, obviously we met today, we'll meet for the next 2 weeks to wrap up this video from Andy Stanley, hear more about this kind of idea of conflict and working through honesty and truthfulness, and kind of his final parenting suggestions and tips and advice. We will take a break on May 9th, which is Mother's Day. Don't forget. It's also Confirmation Sunday, so if you have some confirmands, then it'll be a very celebratory day at the church. And then we'll come back on May 16th. We have a wonderful Christ Church parent who works at Prisma, who does a lot of education with families all around Greenville around primarily child safety. Talks a lot about car seats and just general safety tips. And so we're inviting the preschool families into that conversation with us, and working with children's ministry to kind of spread the word about that. So that will be on May 16th at our usual time, 10 to 10:45. And I'm really looking forward to that. And it's just a offering, especially going into the summer, as we all go off, hopefully on lots of fun, looking towards the end of the pandemic adventures, that we can be safe and well and come back together at the end of the summer, all in one piece. So with that, I'm going to close our time in prayer, and I will see you all next week. So the Lord be with you. God, I thank you for the opportunity to meet on Zoom, even as we experience some Zoom fatigue in this beautiful spring weather. I thank you for all of the parents of our church, for everyone who loves children, loves the way that you have created us in your image. And I pray that as we go into this week, that you would guide us and strengthen us and help us walk in your ways and listen to your voice and follow your path. I thank you for everyone who is here and everyone who cannot be here today, that we are all collectively the body of Christ, and we are all collectively loved and strengthened by you. Pray we come together next week happy and safe and healthy. It's in your son's name we pray. Amen.